Hello everyone, I am Stalin PC, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, St. Paul's College, Kalamassery. Through this video lecture, you are going to study about disinvestment and privatization of public sector undertakings in India. In this topic, the subtopic that you are going to study, number one, what is the main difference between disinvestment and privatization? 2. Rationale for disinvestment, or what is the main logic or the reason behind disinvestment? Third one, how this disinvestment policy or privatization evolved in India. And the fourth one, what are the methods through which privatization or disinvestment takes place? And finally, the disinvestment of public sector units in India or public sector undertakings in India till 2019. First, let us try to understand what is the main difference between privatization and disinvestment. Privatization is a process by which the government transfers the productive activity from public sector to the private sector. What does this mean? The government owns a particular factory or a company. The government purchased the land, the government constructed the building, and government is operating a particular business. Maybe manufacturing of some machines. But later government find it's difficult to run or go along with that business. So if the government want to sell this to the private sector, the government can sell the entire property, the entire building, all those tools, machines, everything the government can sell this to the private sector. So when privatization takes place, the whole asset, the factory, everything is passed to the private sector. Now the private sector or the individuals who buy that particular asset or company will take care of that company. So the ownership is changed from the government to the private sector. So that is known as the privatization. Then what is disinvestment? Disinvestment is selling the share of the government owned undertakings to the private sector. So in disinvestment, not the ownership is transferred, because the government sells only 20% of that total value to the private sector, or 49% is sold to the private sector. So not the entire unit is not sold to the private sector, but partially the government is selling these companies to the private sector. So that is known as disinvestment. So disinvestment is selling the share of this public sector undertakings to the private sector. So the important thing that you have to note here is that disinvestment does not lead to the changes in the management or the ownership of the public sector units. Disinvestment may in the long run leads to privatization, because disinvestment leads to privatization. If the entire shares are sold to the private sector, then that is known as the privatization. But if only some of the shares are sold to the private sector, then that is known as disinvestment. The next point that we are going to discuss is what is the rationale for privatization and disinvestment in India, or what is the reasons or the main logic behind disinvestment or privatization in India. So there are 6 important points to substantiate privatization or disinvestments in India. The first one is that the private sector introduces the profit-oriented decision making. That's the first one. So if you want to get more profit, you need to increase your efficiency and performance. So this is generally believed that the changing the ownership from the government sector to the private sector leads to improved efficiency and performance of that particular undertakings or the business unit. That's the first one. And in the second point is that in public sector enterprises, no one can be held responsible for any lapses, because people shift the responsibility from one person to other. But if you come to the private sector, the job role is clearly defined, and this make it possible to take people to task in the private sector units. So that's the second point. And the third point is that in private sector, if the firm want to raise money from the capital market, they have to perform very well, because the private sector firms are subjected to capital market discipline and scrutiny by financial experts. So if they want to survive, there is no doubt that they have to increase the efficiency and the performance. Then only for future expansions they will be able to raise a fund from the capital market. So that's the third point. The fourth point is related to the political interference. In public sector undertakings, political interference is unavoidable. Who should come to the top post might be decided by the political parties or the political personnels. When they are appointed to that post, the criterion may not be the efficiency or the qualification, but maybe some other interest. But when we come to the private sector, the topmost posts are reserved for people with extra qualities, qualifications and efficiency. So this leads to great operational efficiency to that particular sector or the units. And the fifth point is, many public sector enterprises may remain headless for a long period of time. When that top post is not recruited at the right time, this may cause confusion and delay in decision making, and lack of decision making at the right time may lead to decreased or declined operational efficiency. And the last point is customer satisfaction. As far as the public sector is concerned, caring for customer is generally not a priority. But when we come to the private sector, they know that customer satisfaction really matters. So they will try to take care of their customers. So this will ensure repeated buying and thriving of their business. To run this public sector undertakings, the government from its exchequer was spending a lot of money, and over the period some of or many of the public sector undertakings became inefficient and they began to make loss. So at this point there is no point in spending such money or huge money to maintain such public sector undertakings. Even the policy makers argued that the economic crisis or the fiscal crisis of 1991 is because of this, because the government had to spend a lot of money to maintain those public sector undertakings. So this strained the government exchequer, and that's why that fiscal mismatch happened. So from 1991 onwards, there was a progressive thought towards privatization. So government after government, whether it belongs to or led by the Congress or led by the BJP, they went with the privatization process. So in 1991-92 budget speech, the government of India made it straight that they are ready to divest or disinvest up to 20% of its equity in selected public sector undertakings to mutual funds and investment institutions in the public sector. And in 1993, the report of the Rangarajan Committee on disinvestment was tabled, and the committee recommended that the percentage of equity divested could be up to 49% for industries reserved for the public sector, and that in an exceptional cases up to 74% of equity could be divested. In industries not reserved for the public sector, 100% of the equity could be divested. So that was the recommendations given by Rangarajan Committee. In 1999, the commission under the chairmanship of G.V. Ramakrishna recommended divestment of 58 different public sector undertakings. The same year, that is 1999, a strategic and non-strategic classification took place, and the strategic industries were limited to A. Arms and ammunitions, B. Atomic energy, C. Mining and minerals for atomic industry, and D. Railway transport. All other industries were classified as non-strategic. So in non-strategic public sector undertakings, it was decided that the government need to keep only 26% of the equity, and the rest can be sold to the private sector. So, but we can understand from all these analysis is that the committee's recommendations were in favor of privatization. So the government, one after the other, went privatization in India. Now let us look at what are the various methods used for disinvestment or privatization. The first important method is IPO or initial public offering. Under this method, the share of the public sector are sold to the retail investors. The government calculate the monetary value of that public sector undertaking, so the total money value of that public sector unit, and split into number of shares, and the general public now can buy those shares and become the owner. And if the government sell partially, maybe 40% or 49% of its shares to the general public or the institutions and keep the remaining with the government, then that is known as disinvestment. But if the government sell all the shares to the general public or institutions, private institutions, then that will become the privatization. So this is one of the important method through which the government does disinvestment or privatization. Next method is the strategic sales. In this method, the government sells its shares in the public sector undertakings to a strategic partner. So what happened here is that since the strategic partner buys the share of the public sector undertakings, the management passes over to the buyer, this strategic partner. The advantage claimed for this method is the performance and efficiency of the enterprise is expected to improve as the private partner introduces better management practices on one hand and the unit is freed from the government shackles on the other hand. The strategic partner may be willing to pay more price because he is having an existing business. So combining these two may bring externalities. So the government may realize more revenue from the sales of this public sector undertakings to a strategic partner. So apart from initial public offering, strategic sale is another option for this privatization. Another method for privatization is sales to foreigners. This is a variant of the strategic sales method we discussed before. The only difference is that the buyer is not a domestic company but a foreign company. In some countries where the local capital is very limited, then the government has no other options to sell to a company, a foreign company, which is willing to buy the stakes in that company. So sales to foreigners is nothing but a variant of sales to the strategic partner. Now let us look at the statistics related to the disinvestment of public sector units in India. Disinvestment of public sector units is a process of public asset sales by the President of India on behalf of Government of India. It may be directly through IPO or indirectly through a bidding process in the capital market. There are 331 central public sector undertakings in India in 2017-18, out of which 257 were in operation. If we take the decadal statistics, from 1991 to 2000-2001, the government received 18,480 crore rupees through the sale of public sector undertakings. From 2001 to 2010-11, the revenue realized through the sale of the public sector undertakings was 78,761 crore rupees, and that jumped to 2,33,232 crores in 2011 to 2018. So since the financial year 2001 to 2002 to 2018-19, the government led by various political parties sold a total public assets of 3,30,473 crores. The examples of the public sector undertakings which were sold to the private sector, so the few examples are Bharat Aluminium Company Limited, India Petrochemical Corporation Limited, Modern Food Industries, etc. So these are the public sector undertakings which were completely sold to the private sector. Now it's time to recollect the important point that we have discussed. The first one is the difference between disinvestment and privatization. Second one, rationale behind privatization. Third one, evolution of policies since 1991 for privatization, and the three methods that is used for privatization in India. And finally, the statistics since 1991 to 2018, that how much money the government realized through the sale of public sector undertakings and the examples of privatization in India. And I hope that you understood this lesson, and if you have any queries or suggestions, feel free to contact me. Thank you very much.